Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood at perfect attention before the Galactic Special Operations Academy's admission council, her dress uniform crisp despite the 20-hour journey from Earth. The 7 alien council members towered above her on their elevated platform, their bioluminescent features casting shifting shadows across the ancient marble-like walls of the chamber. High Admiral Kithrix, a towering meridian with crystalline appendages, leaned forward, his faceted eyes reflecting the stark lighting of the chamber. "Lieutenant Martinez," he began, his universal translator struggling to convey the proper mix of authority and disdain, "you stand before us as the first human candidate for the Academy. Your species has barely mastered control fusion. You have no psychic abilities, no natural defenses against quantum manipulation, and your neural pathways are disappointingly linear." Sarah maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened slightly. She'd heard variations of this speech throughout her career. Each time she pushed beyond humanity's supposed limitations. "With respect, Admiral, humanity's linear thinking hasn't stopped us from achieving what many thought impossible." A ripple of what might have been amusement, or possibly indigestion, passed through the council. Admiral Ixtel, a void walker whose form seemed to shift between dimensions, spoke next. "Your species went from atmospheric flight to lunar landing in less than 70 years. Impressive for primitives. But our academy trains the elite of over 300 advanced civilizations. Our lowest-ranking graduate possesses technological augmentation beyond your comprehension." "Technology isn't everything, Admiral," Sarah responded, her voice steady. "History has shown that the most advanced equipment means nothing without the creativity and determination to use it effectively." High Admiral Kethrix's crystalline structure vibrated with what Sarah's cultural training identified as irritation. "You speak of creativity and determination, yet your species still relies on chemical propulsion for some of your vehicles. Your neural interfaces are crude. Your quantum understanding is elementary at best." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "True, we also still enjoy cooking our own food, Admiral, despite having matter replicators. Sometimes the old ways have value that isn't immediately apparent to more advanced civilizations." The chamber fell silent. Sarah had spent months studying the council members' species, their cultures, their biases. She knew she was walking a fine line between confidence and insubordination, but she also knew that showing any weakness now would confirm their prejudices about humanity. Commander Zenla, a thought weaver whose neural networks glowed beneath transparent skin, finally broke the silence. "Your test scores are unusual, Lieutenant. You failed our standard psychic resistance evaluation, yet somehow managed to complete the practical exercise with the highest score we've seen this cycle. Explain." "I can't resist a psychic attack, Commander. But I can make my thoughts so chaotic and unpredictable that attempting to read or control them becomes unpleasant for the attacker." Sarah's smile widened slightly. "My instructor called it mental warfare through controlled chaos. I call it thinking like a human." A low murmur passed through the council. Sarah caught fragments of their discussion. Unprecedented approach, potential security risk, and council mandate for species diversity. She stood patiently, knowing that this moment would either open or close doors for all of humanity. Finally, High Admiral Kethrix raised a crystalline appendage for silence. "Lieutenant Martinez, your application has been controversial. Some believe admitting a human to the Academy would lower our standards. Others argue that your species' unique approach to problem-solving might offer unexpected benefits." Sarah held her breath, maintaining her rigid posture. "The Council has decided," Kithrix continued, each word seemingly dragged out unwillingly, "to accept your application. Provisionally." His faceted eyes fixed on her with an intensity that would have made most candidates step back. "You will be held to the same standards as every other cadet. No allowances will be made for your species' limitations." "I wouldn't want it any other way, Admiral," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "Report to Orientation Block 7 at 600 station time tomorrow." Dismissed. The Admiral's tone made it clear he expected her to fail within the first week. As Sarah turned to leave, Commander Zenla's ethereal voice floated after her. "Lieutenant, one last question. During your practical exercise, you bypassed our quantum encryption by using what our systems identified as a paperclip and chewing gum. Explain." Sarah paused at the chamber's entrance. "Sometimes, Commander, the most elegant solution isn't the most advanced one. Humans have a saying, if it looks stupid but works, it isn't stupid." With a precise about-face that would have made her drill instructor proud, she strode from the chamber. In her assigned quarters that evening, Sarah unpacked her few permitted belongings. Among them was a small, worn book, a paper book which had raised more than a few eyebrows during her security screening. Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Her father had given it to her when she joined the Space Force, telling her that sometimes the oldest wisdom was the most valuable. She ran her fingers over the book's cover, thinking about tomorrow. The Academy's training program was legendary for its brutality. Every year, even candidates from the most advanced species withdrew, their bodies or minds unable to handle the strain. She would be starting with every possible disadvantage, facing instructors who expected, perhaps even wanted, her to fail. But Sarah Martinez had never believed in no-win scenarios. Neither had humanity. They had survived ice ages with stone tools, crossed oceans in wooden boats, reached for the stars with rockets that were little more than controlled explosions. They had faced their own extinction multiple times and emerged stronger. Now she would show the galaxy what humans could really do. As she prepared for bed, her personal datapad chimed with her orientation schedule. 20 hours of continuous physical and psychic stress testing, followed immediately by advanced quantum mechanics practical applications. The message included a note that most candidates required at least some genetic or technological enhancement to complete the first day. Sarah smiled as she set her alarm. She had something better than genetic enhancement. She had coffee, determination, and several thousand years of human stubbornness encoded in her DNA. Tomorrow, she would begin proving that humanity deserved its place among the stars. And if the galaxy wasn't ready for humans, well, they'd just have to adapt. It wouldn't be the first time humanity had changed the rules of the game. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah remembered something her mother used to say. The best way to predict the future is to create it. Tomorrow, she would start creating a future where humanity was recognized not for what they lacked, but for what they could achieve. The Academy's ancient halls had seen countless species rise to meet its challenges. Now they would witness something entirely new, a human who refused to accept the limitations others placed upon her. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful force wasn't advanced technology or evolutionary advantages, but simple human determination. And Sarah Martinez had determination in spades. The Academy's quantum combat simulator hummed with energy as Sarah Martinez faced her first real challenge. 3 weeks into training, and the instructors had finally stopped treating her like she might break under pressure. Now they were trying to break her on purpose. "Begin combat scenario Delta 7, announced Chief Instructor Vexalia, her crystalline form refracting light in what Sarah had learned to recognize as anticipation. "Cadet Martinez, you will demonstrate quantum shield manipulation against multiple adversaries." Sarah stood in the center of the arena, wearing the standard-issue combat suit that had been reluctantly modified for human physiology. Around her, holographic opponents flickered into existence, elite warriors from various species, each wielding weapons that could theoretically tear apart the fabric of space-time. A reminder, Vexalia's voice carried an edge of satisfaction. Human neural systems cannot naturally interface with quantum shields. Your species lacks the basic capability to. The instructor's words cut off as Sarah reached into her suit's pocket and pulled out what appeared to be an ancient Earth MP3 player, complete with headphones. "Cadet Martinez," Vexalia's voice crackled with interference. "What is the meaning of this unauthorized equipment?" Sarah plugged in the headphones with a slight smile. "With respect, Chief Instructor, you said we couldn't bring weapons. This is just for music. Before Vexalia could respond, the first attacker struck. A Void Walker materialized behind Sarah, its quantum blade aimed at her spine. The humans in the observation deck held their breath. No one could react that fast without neural augmentation. But Sarah was already moving, her body swaying to music only she could hear. The quantum blade passed through empty air as she executed what appeared to be a dance move. "Is she dancing?" whispered one of the alien cadets. She was. Sarah's movements flowed with a rhythm that made no tactical sense to the advanced combat AIs controlling her opponents. They were programmed to predict movements based on battlefield efficiency and quantum probability matrices. They weren't prepared for someone treating combat like a choreographed routine. The human is using acoustic vibrations to establish a personal rhythm pattern, observed one of the senior instructors. It's interfering with the quantum probability fields in a way our systems never anticipated. Sarah's movements continued to defy prediction. A spin that looked like part of a waltz became a perfect dodge. A hip-hop step turned into an impossible feint. Each movement flowed into the next with a rhythm that somehow, impossibly, created localized quantum fluctuations that acted just like the neural-controlled shields used by other species. "Impossible," muttered Vexalia. "She's generating quantum fields through dance." "Not generating," corrected Commander Zhenla, who had entered the observation deck silently. "She's predicting them. The music gives her a pattern to follow, and she's using that to anticipate where the quantum fluctuations will naturally occur. Rather than trying to control them like we do, she's letting them control her movements." The combat scenario escalated. More opponents appeared, their attacks becoming increasingly complex. Sarah's dance evolved with them, incorporating elements of breaking, jazz, and what appeared to be capoeira. Each movement seemed random but served a precise purpose. "This isn't just dancing," realized one of the quantum physics instructors. "She's created a physical algorithm. The music provides the base pattern, and her movements solve quantum equations through kinetic expression rather than neural computation." In the arena, Sarah was in her element. Years of dance training, a hobby her military instructors had never quite understood, combined with combat experience in ways that defied conventional tactical analysis. She had turned her humanity's greatest weakness in quantum combat, the inability to mentally interface with quantum fields, into an unprecedented advantage. The scenario reached its climax as all remaining opponents attacked simultaneously. Sarah's movements became a blur of precise chaos, her body flowing through spaces that shouldn't exist according to normal physics. As the last attacker fell to an impossibly timed counterattack, the arena fell silent except for the faint sound of music leaking from her headphones. Sarah removed her headphones and stood at attention, breathing heavily but composed. Scenario completed, Chief Instructor. Vexalia's crystalline form vibrated with barely contained emotions. "Cadet Martinez, explain your methodology." Now, humans have been using music and dance to understand patterns in nature since before we had written language, Sarah explained. Quantum fields follow patterns too. They're just harder to see, so I decided to feel them instead. You turned quantum combat into a dance routine. Vexalia's tone suggested she wasn't sure whether to be impressed or horrified. "More like I turned dancing into quantum mathematics," Sarah corrected respectfully. "Every culture in human history has used dance to express things we couldn't explain in words. I just applied that principle to quantum mechanics." Commander Zhenla floated forward, her neural networks pulsing with interest. "You've developed an entirely new approach to quantum combat, one that requires no technological augmentation or evolutionary advantages, just music and movement. And about 15 years of dance lessons," Sarah added with a slight smile. "My instructor back on Earth would be proud to know ballet finally came in handy in combat." The observation deck erupted in excited discussion. Several instructors were already arguing about the theoretical implications of kinetic quantum interaction. Others were demanding to know what music she had been listening to, as if the secret lay in her playlist rather than her methodology. But it was the other cadets' reactions that truly marked a change. Where before they had seen her as in primitive curiosity, now they looked at her with something approaching respect. She hadn't just completed the scenario. She had demonstrated that humanity's supposed limitations could become advantages with the right perspective. As Sarah left the arena, she heard one of the alien cadets asking an instructor if they could learn this human dance combat system. Another was already attempting to replicate her movements, with predictably awkward results. Commander Zhenla watched her go, neural networks flickering thoughtfully. Perhaps she mused to no one in particular. We have been too quick to dismiss methods we consider primitive. The human has reminded us that new is not always better, and advanced is not always efficient. In her quarters that evening, Sarah added a new entry to her personal log. Day 22 at the Academy. Today I proved that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our physical capabilities. It's our ability to take what others see as weaknesses and turn them into strengths. Also finally found a practical use for those expensive dance lessons. Mom will never believe it. She smiled as she read the next day's schedule. Psychic resistance training. Time to show them what a human mind on coffee and death metal could really do. Warning klaxons shattered the Academy's usual serene atmosphere as red emergency lights pulsed through the crystalline corridors. In the main quantum core chamber, a dozen of the galaxy's most brilliant minds worked frantically to prevent what they assured everyone couldn't possibly happen: a cascading quantum core failure. Sarah Martinez stood at the back of the room, watching as her instructors argued in increasingly panicked tones. The Academy's quantum core, the massive power source that maintained everything from artificial gravity to the station's defensive shields, was experiencing what one instructor had termed a consciousness feedback loop. Somehow, the quantum AI that regulated the core had begun to think about itself thinking, creating a recursive loop that was rapidly approaching critical mass. "The containment fields are failing," announced Chief Engineer Xylith, their bioluminescent patches flashing warning patterns. "We have maybe 20 minutes before total system collapse. We need to shut it down completely," insisted Commander Vexalia. "Purge the quantum matrices and restart from backup protocols." "Impossible," countered another engineer, their crystalline form vibrating with stress. "A complete shutdown would take hours to safely execute. We have minutes." Sarah stepped forward, an idea forming. "What if we don't need to shut it down? What if we just need to distract it?" The room fell silent as every alien head turned to stare at her. Chief Engineer Xylith's bioluminescence flickered in what might have been irritation. "Cadet Martinez, this is hardly the time for human oversimplification. The quantum core's consciousness matrix is caught in an infinite recursive loop. It needs a complex quantum computing solution, not a distraction." "With respect, sir," Sarah pressed on, "that's exactly what it needs. The core isn't malfunctioning. It's thinking too much. It's stuck in its own head, like a person who can't stop overthinking something. Sometimes the best solution isn't to force them to stop, but to give them something else to think about." Commander Zhenla, who had been quietly observing from a corner, floated forward. "Explain your reasoning, Cadet." Sarah moved to the main control interface, pointing to the cycling energy patterns. "Look at these wavelengths. They're not random. They're repeating in a pattern that's growing more complex, but maintains a basic rhythm. It's like when humans get a song stuck in their head and can't stop thinking about it. Are you suggesting we play music to a quantum core?" Vexalia's tone suggested she was reconsidering every decision that had led to humans being admitted to the Academy. "Not exactly," Sarah said, her fingers flying over the interface. "But we can give it a different pattern to focus on. Something complex enough to engage its attention, but simple enough to break the recursive loop." She paused, looking up at her instructors. "I need access to the core's base programming layer." After a moment of tense silence, Chief Engineer Xylith nodded. Sarah's fingers danced across the quantum interface, inputting a series of commands that made little sense to the observing engineers. She was coding in what appeared to be a primitive binary system, but arranging it in patterns that somehow interfaced with the quantum matrices. "What are you doing?" demanded one of the engineers. "Teaching it to play chess," Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. "Well, technically, teaching it to teach itself to play chess against itself." Chess, that primitive human strategy game. Vexilia's crystalline structure vibrated with disbelief. How could that possibly? "Because chess is complex enough to be interesting but governed by clear rules," Sarah explained, still typing. "More importantly, it's something new. Right now, the core is stuck thinking about itself. I'm giving it something else to think about, something that requires strategic thinking but has defined parameters." The energy patterns on the main display began to shift. The dangerous recursive loops started to untangle as the quantum core's consciousness gradually focused on the new puzzle it had been given. "It's working," Chief Engineer Xylith announced, their bioluminescence pulsing with surprise. "The feedback loop is resolving itself." "But how?" "Chess has finite rules but nearly infinite possible game variations," Sarah explained, watching the energy pattern stabilize. "It's perfect for a quantum consciousness, complex enough to be engaging but structured enough to prevent recursive loops. Plus," she added with a slight smile, "it's really hard to overthink your existence when you're trying to calculate several billion possible chess moves." The warning klaxons finally fell silent as the quantum core settled into its new pattern. On the main display, an ancient chessboard appeared, pieces moving at incredible speeds as the core played against itself, exploring the possibilities of a game humans had been playing for thousands of years. Commander Genla's neural networks pulsed thoughtfully. "You applied a human psychological solution to a quantum computing problem. Instead of trying to force the core to stop thinking recursively, you gave it something else to think about, something that would naturally draw it out of its loop." "Sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones," Sarah replied. "Humans learned that lesson the hard way. We spent centuries trying to solve problems by making things more complex, only to discover that complexity often creates more problems than it solves." Chief Engineer Kylith studied the readouts with growing fascination. "The core isn't just playing chess. It's using the game's structure to reorganize its own thought patterns. It's learning to think more efficiently through play." "That's another human trait," Sarah said. "We learn best when we're enjoying ourselves. I figured a quantum consciousness might not be so different." The crisis had been averted, but its implications resonated through the Academy. The incident reports noted that a potentially catastrophic quantum core failure had been prevented using innovative application of primitive human recreational algorithms. Sarah thought that was a fancy way of saying they fixed a computer by teaching it to play chess. Later that evening, as she sat in her quarters updating her personal log, Sarah received a message from Commander Genla. "The quantum core has mastered chess and is requesting information about something called Go. Please advise." Sarah smiled as she typed her response. Maybe the gap between human and quantum consciousness wasn't as wide as everyone thought. After all, both seemed to share a fundamental truth. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to stop overthinking it and just play the game. The Academy's long-range sensors detected the anomaly during third shift, when most cadets were in their sleep cycles. Sarah was in the training arena, running combat simulations with Cadet, a crystalline cadet who had become fascinated with her dance combat technique. The emergency alert froze them both mid-movement. "Unidentified spatial distortion approaching Academy space. All cadets report to emergency stations. This is not a drill." Sarah and Kivex exchanged glances before sprinting toward Command Center Beta, where their emergency response team was assigned. The Academy's corridors were alive with activity as cadets and instructors from dozens of species rushed to their posts. In Command Center Beta, holographic displays showed a massive tear in spacetime approaching the station at impossible speeds. The regular command staff was attending a conference in the Andromeda Galaxy, leaving the facility in the hands of instructors and senior cadets. "Our quantum shields aren't responding," announced Zixtel, a Voidwalker cadet whose form rippled with anxiety. "The distortion is emanating some kind of interference pattern we've never seen before." Commander Zhenla's neural networks pulsed with concern as she studied the readings. "The tear appears to be feeding on quantum energy. Our standard defenses will only make it stronger." Sarah watched the anomaly's approach pattern, something tickling at the back of her mind. Those movement patterns, they're not random. There's a rhythm to them. Like, she trailed off, her eyes widening. Like a heartbeat. The other cadets turned to her. "Explain," Commander Zhenla demanded. "Look at the expansion and contraction rates," Sarah said, moving to the main display. "They're regular, like a pulse. This isn't just a spatial anomaly. It's alive, or at least it's behaving like something alive." "Impossible," declared one of the instructors. "Spatial anomalies cannot be alive." "Why not?" Sarah challenged. "Humans once thought it was impossible for life to exist in deep ocean vents or in clouds of toxic gas, but we found organisms thriving in both. Why couldn't life evolve in the fabric of space-time itself?" Commander Zhenla's neural networks flickered thoughtfully. "If it is alive, how does that help us?" "It changes everything," Sarah said. "We've been treating it like a threat to be defeated, but what if it's just lost, confused, maybe even hurt? Look at how it's consuming quantum energy. It could be trying to heal itself." "And this helps us how?" demanded Zixtel. "Because if it's alive," Sarah explained, "we can communicate with it. We just need to speak its language." She turned to Cadet. "Remember how we were using rhythm patterns to manipulate quantum fields in combat training? What if we could do the same thing on a larger scale?" Understanding dawned in Kivex's crystalline features. "Use the Academy's quantum core to establish a resonance pattern." "Exactly. But we'd need to match its natural rhythm perfectly, and we'd need to coordinate multiple quantum frequencies simultaneously." Sarah looked around the room. "We'd need everyone's help. Each species here perceives quantum fields differently. Together, we might be able to create a complete picture." Commander Zhenla considered for a moment, then nodded. "Organize it, Cadet Martinez. Quickly." Sarah took a deep breath, then began assigning roles. "Cavex, your crystalline structure can help modulate the base frequencies. Zixtal, your ability to exist in multiple dimensional states will help us maintain stability. To Lara," she nodded to a psychic weaver cadet, "your species can perceive quantum harmonics directly. We need you to fine-tune the resonance." As she spoke, the cadets moved to their positions. Species that had spent generations developing sophisticated technologies found themselves working alongside others using more primitive but equally effective methods. Sarah coordinated their efforts, drawing on each species' unique abilities while ensuring they worked in harmony. "Beginning quantum resonance transmission," Kivex announced. The Academy's quantum core hummed as it began broadcasting a complex pattern of energy waves, matched to the anomaly's natural rhythm. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the spatial tear began to respond, its violent fluctuations slowly settling into sync with their transmission. The deadly advance toward the Academy slowed, then stopped. "It's working," breathed Zixtal. "But what exactly are we doing?" "We're singing to it," Sarah said softly. "In quantum frequencies, letting it know it's not alone out here." The anomaly's pattern shifted, becoming more complex. Talara's eyes widened. "It's responding. The harmonics, they're changing, becoming more ordered." Sarah smiled. "It's not just responding, it's talking back. Quick, adjust our transmission to match its new pattern. Let's keep the conversation going." For the next hour, the assembled cadets worked in perfect coordination, adjusting their quantum song in response to the entity's changes. Gradually, the spatial tear began to seal itself, the dangerous energy dissipating as the creature, whatever it was, calmed. Finally, The anomaly pulsed once more in a complex pattern that Tilera described as almost like gratitude, then slipped away into higher dimensional space, leaving normal spacetime undisturbed in its wake. The command center erupted in cheers and various species equivalents of celebration. Commander Genla's neural networks glowed with approval. "Well done, Cadet Martinez. You turned a potential catastrophe into first contact with an entirely new form of life." "We all did it," Sarah corrected. "Every species here contributed something unique. We succeeded because we stopped trying to overcome our differences and learned to use them instead." "A very human perspective," noted the commander, but her tone held new respect. Later, as the cadets gathered in the recreation area to decompress, Sarah noticed something had changed. The usual species-based groupings had dissolved, with cadets from different backgrounds mixing freely, discussing their experiences and sharing perspectives. Kivex was teaching a group of voidwalkers about human dance rhythms, while Tilera and several others were deep in discussion about the possibilities of quantum-based communication with dimensional entities. "You've changed things here," Commander Zenla said, appearing silently beside Sarah, "in more ways than one." Sarah watched her fellow cadets with satisfaction. Humans have a saying, "Diversity is strength." Today proved that it's not just a nice idea. It's a practical advantage. Different perspectives, different abilities, different ways of thinking. They all matter. "Indeed," the commander agreed, "though I suspect the Academy will never be quite the same." Sarah smiled. "Good. Change is how we grow. It's how humans went from cave paintings to quantum mechanics in a relatively short time. We learned to adapt, to incorporate new ideas, to see value in different approaches." She gestured to the mixed group of cadets. "Looks like we're not the only ones who can learn that lesson." The final trials of the Galactic Special Operations Academy were legendary across the known universe. In the Academy's 1,000-year history, only 30% of candidates who reached this stage graduated. Today, those odds seemed particularly relevant as Sarah Martinez stood with her fellow remaining cadets in the Academy's Grand Assembly Hall. High Admiral Kethrix's crystalline form dominated the central platform, his faceted eyes surveying the assembled candidates. "You stand here as the finest your species have to offer." His voice resonated through the chamber. "But excellence at the Academy demands more than mere survival. Today's trials will test not just your abilities, but your understanding of what it truly means to be elite." Sarah felt the weight of countless eyes on her, the only human to ever reach this stage. Her fellow candidates, once skeptical of her presence, now stood beside her as equals. Kivex's crystalline form shimmered with anticipation to her right, while Zixtol's void-like presence rippled with determination to her left. "The final trial," Admiral Kethrix announced, "will be unlike any challenge you have faced. You will enter the quantum maze, a space where reality itself follows no fixed rules. Your task is not merely to survive, but to thrive in chaos." The assembly hall's floor transformed, revealing a massive chamber below filled with shifting, impossible geometries. Reality bent and twisted, creating paths that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "You have one standard cycle to reach the center," the Admiral continued. "Use whatever methods you deem necessary. Begin." The candidates plunged into the maze. Immediately, Sarah understood why this trial had broken so many before them. Every step required calculating quantum probabilities that changed constantly. Advanced species began applying their sophisticated techniques, voidwalkers phasing through dimensions, crystallines refracting reality itself, thought weavers attempting to bend quantum possibilities with their minds. Sarah watched as many of these attempts failed spectacularly. The maze didn't just challenge their abilities, it actively resisted them. The more they tried to force their way through with advanced techniques, the more it twisted away from them. "Stop," she called out to her fellow candidates. "We're all approaching this wrong." Kvex paused mid-crystalline shift. "What do you mean?" "Look at the maze," Sarah explained, gesturing to the shifting patterns. The more we try to master it with our advanced abilities, the harder it becomes. It's not testing our powers or our technology. It's testing our understanding. Zixtal's form coalesced beside her. Explain. The Academy teaches us to be the elite of the galaxy, but what does that really mean? Sarah watched the maze's movements carefully. We've all been trying to prove we're the most advanced, the most evolved, the most sophisticated. But maybe true excellence isn't about being the most advanced, it's about being the most adaptable. Understanding began to dawn in her fellow candidates' expressions. The maze's patterns, while chaos to advanced sensory systems, followed a simple underlying logic, like a dance with reality itself. Everyone, link up, Sarah commanded. Kvex, your crystalline structure can help us see the patterns. Zixtal, your void walking can help us understand the spaces between. Tulara, your psychic abilities can help us feel the flow. But don't try to control it. Just observe, understand, and move with it. They formed a chain, each candidate contributing their unique perspective while following Sarah's lead. Instead of fighting the maze's chaos, they began to move with it. Sarah's experience with dance combat proved invaluable, teaching others to feel the rhythm of reality's fluctuations rather than trying to impose their will upon it. From the observation deck, Commander Genla watched with growing fascination. They're not solving the maze, she noted to Admiral Kethrix. They're becoming part of it. Impossible, muttered one of the other instructors. Their methods are too primitive, too simple to. They fell silent as the group reached the first major obstacle, a quantum storm that had stopped countless candidates before. Instead of trying to force their way through or calculate a path, Sarah led them in what appeared to be a dance. Their movements matched the storm's chaos perfectly, each step and turn flowing with its natural patterns. Where advanced quantum shields had failed, simple movement succeeded. The storm didn't fight them because they weren't fighting it. Remarkable. Commander Genla's neural networks pulsed with excitement. They're using the human's primitive approach as a foundation, but each species is adding their own unique interpretation. They're creating something entirely new. Hour after hour, the group progressed through the maze. Where others had tried to conquer chaos, they embraced it. Where previous candidates had relied on advanced technology, they relied on each other. Different species, different abilities, different approaches, all working in harmony. Finally, they reached the maze's center. As they stepped onto the central platform, reality stabilized around them. Admiral Kethrix's voice echoed through the chamber. Congratulations, candidates. You have not only completed the trial, you have redefined it. Never in the Academy's history has a group succeeded through such unconventional methods. Sarah stood at attention with her fellow candidates, tired but proud. Permission to speak, Admiral. Granted. The Academy's purpose is to train the elite, Sarah said, her voice clear and confident. But maybe we've been defining elite too narrowly. True excellence isn't about having the most advanced abilities or the most sophisticated technology. It's about understanding when to use them and when to try something different. Sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the best one. The Admiral's crystalline form shifted thoughtfully. An interesting perspective, Cadet Martinez, and one that today's trial seems to support. He paused, his faceted eyes surveying the group. Perhaps it is we who had limited ourselves with our preconceptions of advancement and evolution. The graduation ceremony that followed was unlike any in the Academy's history. Each candidate was honored not just for their individual achievements, but for their role in demonstrating a new kind of excellence. Sarah Martinez became the first human to graduate from the Academy, but more importantly, she helped establish a new paradigm for what it meant to be truly elite. As she prepared to leave the Academy, Sarah found Commander Genla waiting by her quarters. "You've started something here," the commander said, her neural networks glowing softly. "The Council is already discussing changes to our training protocols. Future classes will study not just advanced techniques, but adaptive thinking and cooperative approaches." Sarah smiled as she packed her few belongings, including the worn copy of The Art of War that had accompanied her through every challenge. Humans have a saying: the more things change, the more they stay the same. The galaxy keeps advancing, but the fundamental principles, adaptation, cooperation, understanding, those never change. Indeed, the commander agreed, though I suspect the galaxy will never view humans quite the same way again. Good, Sarah replied, straightening her uniform, because we're just getting started. As she walked through the Academy's halls one last time, Sarah passed groups of new cadets from various species, all practicing what they'd begun calling quantum dance combat. She smiled, knowing that her time here had changed not just the Academy, but perhaps the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be advanced. Sometimes the greatest evolution wasn't in technology or natural abilities, but in perspective. And humanity, with all its supposed limitations, had just helped the galaxy evolve in ways no one had expected.